So DiffNet is essentially a algorithm that was, I guess I invented along with my collaborator, Thomas Burke, a while back, actually, in maybe I think 2 years ago. We actually presented this in the American Headache Society. So essentially what it does is it's a differential diagnosis generator. So in the ICHD3, you have the criteria, but then after the criteria, you also have a whole bunch of comments. And the comments usually say, okay, so let's say this is like migraine. On the bottom it says migraine. You should think about, I don't know, I'm just making this up, okay, like RCBS or something like that. It or is weird. And then the nice thing about the ICHD3 is that in the comment section they'll also say RCBS, and then they'll tell you the code, ICHD code. So if you think about it, if you look at it this way, since every single section has a comment that does that, and the whole ICH3 has that, so essentially you can think of the whole thing as a network, as a graph, where in the example I just gave you, the migraine with aura has a comment that says RCBS, so you can say, okay, migraine is connected to RCBS. So every single diagnosis in this graph would be a node in the graph, and then every single connection would be an edge. So for example, in this graph, migraine and RCBS would be the node, and then because they are mentioned together in the comment section, so they would form an edge to the graph. So you can generate a big graph like this, and essentially what DiffNet does is once you give it an input, so let's say migraine with aura, and then it'll tell you what is its first degree neighbors, what are its friends, essentially, that it knows about, and you can tell it, what's the first degree neighbor and second degree neighbor, what is this, if you think of this like Facebook, essentially, if migraine is you and RCBS is your friend, they'll tell you, okay, what are the friends that it has? So essentially the clinical implication of this is that DiffNet essentially is a differential diagnosis generator. So when you tell it migraine with aura, it'll tell you what are the other possibilities, primary or secondary headache, that are possible for this from an ICH3 point of view. So that's what DiffNet is. But what makes this paper, and by the way, this paper is actually published already in I think Diagnostics, one of the journals. What it does is essentially, if you think of you can think of differential diagnosis as a collection of objects, and then you can think of you can then try to relate different sets of differential diagnosis by these things called set and subset relationships. So for example, let's say that I'm just making this up again. Let's say your differential diagnosis for migraine with aura is like 3 things. Let's say like familial hemiplegic migraine, RCBS, I don't know, like it's just those 2, fine. Can't come up with another one because I'm jet lagged. So let's say that's a set, and let's say you have another diagnosis, just say familial hemiplegic migraine type 1. A differential diagnosis might be familial hemiplegic migraine type 1 and 2, And so in some sense, you can think of familial hemiplegic migraine type 3 or type 1, or whatever that second set is essentially a subset of the first one, because the first one is a bigger set and it kind of encompasses the second one, So this actually kind of forms a hierarchy relationship between these diagnoses, and essentially differential diagnosis can be translated as a hierarchy. So what this paper does is map out all this hierarchy for every single objects in the ICHE3, every single differential diagnosis, according to DiffNet anyways. And in other words, what it does, the end result, the long and short of it, is that it essentially translates the ICHE3 through differential diagnosis into a hierarchy of phenotypes, headache phenotypes. And it kind of makes sense if you think about it. It wasn't very obvious to me when I first did it, but the thing is, if you think about what kind of differential diagnosis are subsets of each other, then what you're really saying is, what does headache in what kind of headache look like each other? Because if they look the same, they're probably going to be differential diagnoses of each other. So, so that's what that project is about.